Welcome in. Take a closer look at this ordinary Lincoln Memorial cent, because one tiny detail can separate everyday pocket change from a coin collectors have spent years searching for. Step 1. The 1973 United States Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin looks almost too ordinary to deserve a second glance. Yet this familiar little copper-colored cent can become surprisingly interesting when you examine what separates an everyday survivor from a truly exceptional collector piece. More than 5 decades after it entered American commerce, the coin carries the fingerprints of a very specific moment in United States history, from the economic pressures of the early 1970s to the enormous scale of American mint production. At first glance, the date seems to tell only a simple story: Lincoln on the front, the memorial on the back, and a denomination that most people once treated as nearly disposable. But the real story is hidden in the details: where the coin was struck, how sharply it was made, how much original red color survived, whether the surfaces escaped contact marks, and whether the coin belongs to an unusually high grade or a genuinely collectible variety. Later, we will look at authenticated examples that reached remarkable prices in the marketplace and examine why those results should never be confused with the value of an ordinary 1973 cent. Understanding this distinction is essential because billions were produced, while only a tiny fraction survived in the kind of pristine condition that advanced collectors pursue. The 1973 cent, therefore, offers a fascinating lesson in modern coin rarity. Rarity does not always begin with a low mintage. Sometimes it begins with a common coin that is extraordinarily difficult to preserve. The story of the 1973 cent begins with the Lincoln Memorial design that had already become a defining part of American pocket change. The Lincoln portrait on the obverse was based on Victor David Brenner's original 1909 Lincoln cent design, while Frank Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial reverse had been introduced in 1959 to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. By 1973, the memorial reverse was deeply familiar to Americans, showing the building in perspective with United States of America above it, EPLURIBUS UNUM across the upper field, and 1 cent beneath the structure. The tiny initials FG near the lower right of the memorial identify Gasparo as the reverse designer, while Brenner's initials appear on the obverse below Lincoln's shoulder. The coin itself measured about 19 millimeters across, weighed 3.11 grams, and had a plain edge. Its metal was the traditional bronze-colored alloy of approximately 95% copper and 5% zinc, a composition that gave fresh examples their warm, reddish appearance. That chemistry also created one of the most important elements in modern Lincoln cent collecting: color. A newly struck cent could remain bright red for decades if protected from oxygen, moisture, chemicals, and excessive handling, but exposure gradually transformed the surfaces toward reddish-brown and eventually brown. The coin's physical specifications remained remarkably consistent, yet its appearance could change dramatically depending on its life after leaving the mint. That is why two technically identical 1973 cents can occupy completely different places in the collector market. Production numbers reveal just how misleading the word rare can be when applied casually to this coin. Philadelphia struck approximately 3,728,245,000 regular 1973 cents without a mint mark, while Denver produced approximately 3,549,576,588, carrying the small d mint mark. San Francisco also struck approximately 317,177,295 regular cents, in addition to 2,760,339 proof cents intended for collectors. Those numbers mean that a normal circulated 1973 cent is not scarce simply because it is more than 50 years old. Millions upon millions entered commerce, passed through cash registers, vending machines, pockets, drawers, jars, and bank rolls, and many remain in collections today. The early 1970s were also a period of economic change in America. Inflation was becoming increasingly visible, energy costs were rising, and the country was moving through the aftermath of major monetary and political developments. Yet the 1-cent denomination remained an essential part of everyday transactions, requiring the mint to manufacture enormous quantities. Philadelphia and Denver were therefore not producing tiny batches for collectors. They were feeding a national demand for circulating money. This makes the surviving population especially important. A coin can be old and still common, while a coin with billions originally struck can become scarce at the highest grades because ordinary production and decades of circulation are brutal on small copper surfaces. Every contact mark, carbon spot, stain, scratch, and loss of original color can push an otherwise attractive specimen out of the premium category. The challenge is not finding a 1973 cent. The challenge is finding one that looks almost untouched. That difference becomes particularly dramatic when grading enters the picture. Professional grading services evaluate Lincoln cents on a numerical scale, and for an uncirculated piece, the familiar mint state range runs from MS60 upward. A 1973 cent can technically remain uncirculated while still showing numerous distracting marks, weak details, spotting, or poor visual quality. At the higher levels, tiny imperfections become increasingly important. The red, or RD, designation is especially significant because it indicates that the coin retains the required degree of original red coloration. Brown examples, designated BN, can still be collectible, and in unusual circumstances even a brown coin can command serious money, but the market generally rewards exceptional original red coins more aggressively when all other factors are equal. A red-brown, or RB, piece falls between those categories. Strike quality matters as well. Lincoln's hair, cheek, jaw, beard, lettering, and the memorial's architectural details should be examined for sharpness, while the field should be checked for marks that become obvious under magnification. The 1973 Philadelphia issue illustrates this perfectly. PCGS describes examples through approximately MS65 as readily available, while MS66 becomes scarcer. MS67 is much more difficult, and grades above MS67 become rare. That means a collector who discovers a brilliant-looking 1973 cent should resist the temptation to judge it only by eye. A coin that appears flawless under ordinary lighting may reveal hairlines or contact marks under magnification, while another with exceptional luster and nearly pristine fields can become a serious condition rarity. In this part of the Lincoln series, condition can matter more than age. The Denver issue presents an even clearer example of condition rarity. Although approximately 3.55 billion were struck there, PCGS notes that ordinary circulated examples remain common, while the population becomes dramatically more challenging as the grade climbs. Its current Coinfax record shows a certified 1973D red cent graded MS67 selling for $4,994 at Heritage Auctions on February 27, 2014. That result does not mean a normal 1973D cent is worth thousands of dollars. It demonstrates what can happen when a common date reaches an elite condition level. A collector might encounter a circulated 1973D for only a modest amount, while a truly superior red example with exceptional surfaces can occupy an entirely different market. PCGS's population information also describes the MS67 level as especially scarce, noting that fewer than 24 examples were known at MS67 or higher when its commentary was recorded. Philadelphia tells a similar story. A certified 1973 Philadelphia cent graded MS67 plus red has a recorded result of $3,960, dated February 11, 2022. Another striking result involves a 1973 Philadelphia cent graded MS65 brown that realized $1,440 at Stack's Bowers in June 2024. These examples demonstrate why experienced collectors never evaluate the date alone. A coin's color, grade, surface quality, certification, provenance, and the strength of current demand can completely reshape its market position. Even a price around $1,800 or $2,700 would be meaningful only if the specific coin possessed qualities that justified it. The same date in ordinary circulated condition would not automatically share that value. The San Francisco coins add another layer because the mint produced both regular strike cents and proofs. The regular 1973 cent had a mintage of roughly 317 million, and PCGS records an auction result of $2,233 for a certified MS-67 red example sold by Heritage Auctions in August 2016. The proof issue was produced in a much smaller quantity of 2,760,339 and was manufactured specifically for collectors, using specially prepared dies and planchets to create sharper details and reflective fields. Proofs can be categorized as red, cameo, or deep cameo depending on their appearance and contrast, and the finest deep cameo examples can be dramatically more valuable than ordinary proofs. Here the numbers become extraordinary. PCGS records a $12,075 Heritage Auctions result for a 1973 deep cameo proof graded PR70, sold January 7, 2004. That is precisely the kind of extraordinary authenticated result that must be placed in context. It was not simply a 1973 penny selling for $12,000. It was a specific proof, certified at an exceptional grade, with the deep cameo designation and the qualities demanded at the very top of the proof market. A normal 1973 proof can be worth only a small amount, and even a high-grade proof does not automatically approach that record. This is why auction headlines can sometimes create confusion among new collectors. The date and denomination identify the coin, but grade, finish, designation, eye appeal, rarity, and authentication determine the collectible story. Errors and varieties require an equally careful approach, because the internet is filled with photographs of coins described as doubled dies when they actually show mechanical doubling, die deterioration, damage, or simple optical effects. A genuine doubled die originates during die making and can produce distinctive, repeated separation on letters, numerals, or design elements. Ordinary machine doubling happens during striking and usually appears flatter and shelf-like. For the 1973 cent, collectors should not assume that any unusual-looking date or lettering represents a major doubled die. Specialized variety references document 1973 Lincoln cent material, but there is no broadly recognized 1973 Lincoln cent double die variety comparable to famous double dies from other years. That makes authentication especially important if a supposedly rare 1973 error is being offered for a substantial amount. Other legitimate mint errors can exist, including off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through errors, and other production abnormalities, but each must be examined on its own physical evidence. Weight can provide an important first clue, yet it cannot by itself prove an error because normal wear, environmental damage, scale accuracy, and planchet variation can affect measurements. Counterfeits are less common in ordinary 1973 cents than in famous key date coins, but an altered mint mark, artificially enhanced color, polished surface, or fabricated error can still mislead buyers. Professional certification from a respected grading service becomes particularly valuable when the claimed rarity is significant. A collector should also compare the coin's lettering, relief, surface texture, color, dimensions, and weight against known genuine examples rather than trusting a seller's description. Preservation is where the final difference between an ordinary survivor and a desirable specimen can begin. Copper reacts with its environment, so a collector should avoid touching the surfaces directly, especially with bare fingers, because oils and contaminants can leave permanent discoloration. Cleaning is one of the quickest ways to destroy collector value. Abrasive rubbing, polishing compounds, harsh chemicals, dipping experiments, and improvised household treatments can leave unnatural surfaces that professional graders immediately recognize. A 1973 scent that looks dull but original is often preferable to one that has been aggressively cleaned into artificial brightness. For long-term storage, inert archival quality holders or professionally certified slabs are preferable to soft plastic materials that may contain harmful chemicals. Stable temperature and humidity are important, and coins should be kept away from moisture, extreme heat, sulfur-bearing materials, and environments where condensation can occur. When examining an uncirculated example, a bright light positioned at an angle can reveal hairlines, carbon spots, contact marks, and disturbed luster that ordinary room lighting conceals. Magnification helps, but excessive handling should be avoided. Ultimately, the 1973 Lincoln Memorial Cent is a lesson in probability. Billions were made, yet the finest survivors became difficult because time, circulation, storage, and production imperfections relentlessly eliminated the best pieces. An authenticated 1973 cent might be worth only a small amount in ordinary condition, perhaps tens of dollars in a respectable uncirculated grade, several $100s when it reaches an unusually strong condition level, or around $1,000 to $4,000 when it combines exceptional grade, color, rarity, and demand. The documented $4,994 Denver result, the $3,960 Philadelphia result, and the much rarer $12,075, $1,973 SPR-70 Deep Cameo Proof show how far the market can separate exceptional coins from ordinary ones. The real value of the 1973 cent, therefore, is not found simply by reading the date. It is found by examining the evidence: mint mark, strike, color, surfaces, grade, variety, authenticity, preservation, and the willingness of serious collectors to compete for that particular specimen at that particular moment. Step 2. The 1978 United States Lincoln Memorial Cent is the kind of coin that can disappear into a handful of pocket change without attracting the slightest attention. Yet under the right circumstances, the same date can become a serious object of numismatic competition. Its enormous production seems to argue against rarity, and for ordinary circulated examples, that assumption is largely correct. But the deeper story begins when collectors stop asking how many were made and start asking how many survived with the exact combination of originality, sharpness, color, luster, and surface quality that the finest collectors demand. The 1978 cent was produced during a fascinating period in American history, when inflation was reshaping everyday life. The cost of copper was becoming an increasingly important concern for the mint, and the traditional bronze composition of the cent was already facing questions about its long-term practicality. Later, we will examine the factors that determine whether a 1978 cent is merely an old piece of pocket change or a genuinely desirable collector coin, including its mint of origin, grade, color designation, strike quality, varieties, errors, and preservation. We will also look at documented auction results for authenticated specimens and explain why those numbers apply only to particular coins with particular qualities, rather than to every 1978 cent. That distinction is the key to understanding this issue, because the 1978 Lincoln Memorial Cent is not rare in the conventional sense. Its real intrigue lies in condition rarity, the remarkable difficulty of finding an ordinary coin that remained extraordinary after nearly half a century of handling, storage, oxidation, and environmental exposure. To understand why the 1978 cent matters, it helps to place it inside the larger history of the Lincoln Memorial Cent. The Lincoln portrait had originated with Victor David Brenner's celebrated design in 1909, and although the reverse changed in 1959, the obverse remained fundamentally familiar. Frank Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial reverse had replaced the earlier Wheatstock design to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. On the reverse, the memorial appears beneath United States of America and EPLURIBUSUNUM, with 1 cent at the bottom, while Gasparo's initials FG appear near the lower right. The building itself was more than decoration. It connected America's everyday smallest denomination to one of its most consequential presidents, and to a monument representing national unity and remembrance. The physical specifications were equally distinctive. A standard 1978 cent measured 19 millimeters in diameter, weighed 3.11 grams, and had a plain edge. Its planchet consisted of approximately 95% copper and 5% zinc, giving freshly struck pieces the warm reddish-orange appearance associated with traditional bronze Lincoln cents. That composition is especially important because copper changes chemically over time. A newly minted cent can begin with brilliant original red surfaces, but exposure to air, moisture, fingerprints, chemicals, and improper storage can gradually alter that appearance. The transformation from red to red-brown, and eventually brown, is therefore not merely cosmetic. It can have a substantial effect on collector desirability. A coin with the same date, same mint, and same design can occupy a completely different market category simply because one retained its original color while the other did not. The production story of 1978 is where the enormous scale of the issue becomes apparent. Philadelphia struck 5,558,605,000 cents, while Denver produced another 4,280,233,400, making the two regular issue mintages enormous by any historical standard. San Francisco struck 3,127,780, one proof cents for collectors. The Philadelphia issue requires an interesting qualification. Modern research and production records indicate that West Point also contributed to the year's cent output, but those pieces carried no mint mark and therefore cannot normally be distinguished from Philadelphia examples. This is one reason collectors should be cautious when assigning a specific origin to an unmarked 1978 cent. The D on a Denver example is straightforward, but a blank space beneath the date does not prove that a particular coin was physically struck at Philadelphia. The scale of production reflected the continuing demand for cents in everyday commerce. Americans still relied heavily on cash transactions, and billions of small denomination coins were required to keep businesses, vending machines, banks, and cash drawers supplied. Yet the economic environment was changing rapidly. Inflation was a major concern in the late 1970s, and copper prices had become important enough to raise questions about whether the cent's traditional metal composition could remain economically sensible. The mint had already experimented with alternative materials earlier in the decade, including the controversial aluminum cent proposal of 1974. In 1978, the familiar bronze cent was still being produced, but the debate surrounding its cost and composition foreshadowed the eventual change to copper-plated zinc beginning in 1982. In that sense, a 1978 cent belongs to the final chapter of the long-running bronze Lincoln Memorial era, even though several years would pass before the composition actually changed. That huge mintage creates the central paradox of the 1978 Lincoln cent: abundance at the bottom, scarcity at the top. Millions of worn examples survive, and even attractive circulated pieces generally do not command substantial premiums merely because they are nearly 50 years old. The collector's attention shifts dramatically toward mint state coins, particularly pieces that preserve original red coloration and exhibit minimal contact marks. Professional grading services evaluate uncirculated cents numerically, with grades beginning around MS60 and progressing upward as preservation improves. But the difference between MS65 and MS67 can be enormous in practical collecting terms. At MS65, a coin can still show noticeable marks under examination. At the highest levels, collectors expect extraordinarily clean fields, strong luster, excellent strike quality, and outstanding eye appeal. PCGS records a 1978 Philadelphia cent in MS67, red selling for $408 at Stack's Bowers in 2018, while another MS67 red example sold for $144 in 2018, illustrating how even coins carrying the same certification can realize very different results depending on timing, appearance, venue, and competition. The finest Philadelphia examples can move into a much more dramatic category. PCGS records an authenticated MS67 plus red 1978 cent selling for $4,259.38 at Heritage Auctions in September 2014. That result is not evidence that ordinary 1978 cents are worth thousands. It demonstrates the extraordinary premium attached to an elite condition example. The distinction is crucial. The marketplace was not paying for the date alone. It was paying for a certified combination of grade, original red color, surface quality, and scarcity at that level. A collector evaluating a raw coin therefore needs to look beyond brightness. Artificially polished copper can appear brilliant while having almost none of the original mint luster that advanced collectors want. The Denver issue tells a similar story, but follows its own condition profile. More than 4.28 billion were struck there, meaning that the demint mark version is plentiful in ordinary grades. Yet high-grade survivors become increasingly interesting as the numerical grade rises. PCGS records a 1978D red cent graded MS67 selling for $546 at Heritage Auctions in 2008, while another certified MS67 red example realized $223 in 2023. Those differing results are a useful reminder that auction prices are not fixed price tags. The market changes, collectors compete differently from one auction to another, and the visual quality of two coins carrying the same grade can vary considerably. At the top end, the population of surviving certified coins becomes much smaller relative to the billions originally produced. That is what numismatists mean by condition rarity. The coin is not scarce as an object. The particular state of preservation is scarce. A strong candidate should show uninterrupted mint luster across the fields, crisp lettering, well-defined Lincoln details, and minimal distracting marks. The red designation is particularly important for copper collectors because original color is itself a survival characteristic. Red-brown examples retain some original coloration, while brown coins have undergone greater natural color change. Neither designation automatically makes a coin inferior. Some collectors deliberately pursue attractive natural toning, but the premium market for high-grade modern Lincoln cents often concentrates heavily on spectacular red examples. A 1978D that might be worth only a modest amount in ordinary circulation could potentially become a four-figure coin if it were authenticated at an unusually elite grade with exceptional eye appeal. But such a conclusion should never be made from photographs alone. The San Francisco issue introduces an entirely different collecting experience because most collectors encounter the 1978 cent as a proof rather than as a normal circulation strike. San Francisco produced 3,127,781 proof cents that year, and proof manufacturing involved specially prepared dies and planchets intended to create sharper details and distinctive reflective fields. On a strong proof, the contrast between the mirrored fields and frosted design elements can be striking, particularly when the coin receives a cameo or deep cameo designation from a professional grading service. The difference between an ordinary proof and a nearly perfect certified proof can therefore become significant. PCGS records a 1978 deep cameo proof with an auction record of $4,313 for a PR70 example sold by Heritage Auctions on June 26, 2008. Again, this is an extraordinary specialized result, not a valuation for every 1978 cent. Most examples from the proof mintage are nowhere near that market level, and even a beautiful proof must be examined for hairlines, spots, haze, carbon discoloration, and disturbances in the mirrored fields. The proof surfaces are unforgiving because tiny imperfections can become highly visible when light reflects directly from them. This is also where authentication becomes especially useful. A collector should never assume that a shiny 1978 cent is automatically a proof, because circulation strikes can have attractive luster as well. The presence of the S-mint mark, the preparation of the fields, the sharpness of design elements, and the characteristic proof finish all need to be considered together. For serious purchases, professional certification provides an independent assessment of authenticity and condition, and can protect the collector from paying an advance coin price for an ordinary specimen. Varieties and errors deserve careful attention, because the 1978 cent has been surrounded by countless claims of mysterious doubling, unusual mint marks, and supposedly unique defects. Genuine mint errors certainly can occur, and Lincoln cent specialists examine off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through pieces, die cracks, and other production abnormalities. But not every strange mark represents an important error. Mechanical doubling can resemble a doubled die while lacking the characteristics of a true hub doubling, and damage after the coin left the mint can create shapes that look dramatic under magnification. For the 1978 issue, collectors should be particularly skeptical of internet listings that assign extraordinary rarity to an unusual-looking date or letter without specialist attribution. A genuine variety should be identifiable through documented die characteristics rather than simply appearing different. Weight and diameter are useful screening tools, but they are not sufficient to establish an error or authenticate a coin by themselves. A standard 1978 cent should be approximately 3.11 grams and 19 millimeters across, while its plain edge provides another physical reference point. Counterfeit concerns are generally more relevant when someone claims an ordinary coin has been transformed into an extremely valuable rarity, such as by altering a mint mark or artificially manipulating its surfaces. Professional grading services can examine such questions far more reliably than a casual inspection. Collectors should also be wary of cleaned or chemically treated copper. A coin that has been scrubbed may look brighter but lose the original texture and luster that support a premium grade. In practical terms, an authentic MS-67 red specimen with beautiful surfaces may be worth dramatically more than a visually bright but cleaned coin that cannot receive the same grade. The difference is invisible to anyone judging solely by color, but obvious to an experienced grader. The most enduring appeal of the 1978 Lincoln Memorial Cent comes from the fact that it captures an entire era in a coin small enough to fit beneath a fingernail. It was born in an age of inflation, produced in extraordinary quantities, carried the traditional 95% copper composition, and circulated through an America approaching the end of the Bronze Cent era. Today, the ordinary examples are still reminders of everyday commerce, while the finest survivors have become objects of specialized competition. A circulated coin may have little premium beyond its face value. An attractive uncirculated example might command a more meaningful collector price, and a genuinely exceptional certified specimen could enter the range of hundreds or even several $1,000s when grade, red designation, rarity, and demand align. An authenticated high-grade 1978 Philadelphia cent has reached $4,259.38 at auction, while a 1978 SPR70 deep cameo proof reached $4,313, and those documented records provide useful benchmarks without suggesting that every coin carrying the date belongs anywhere near those figures. Preservation is therefore essential. Copper cents should be handled by their edges, kept in inert holders or reputable certified slabs, and protected from humidity, chemicals, extreme temperature changes, and direct contact with skin oils. They should never be polished or cleaned in an attempt to make them look newer. When examining a potential high-grade specimen, angled light and magnification can reveal contact marks, hairlines, carbon spots, weak strikes, and altered surfaces that ordinary room lighting conceals. In the end, the 1978 cent demonstrates one of the most important principles in coin collecting. Rarity is not always about how few were minted. Sometimes it is about how few survived in extraordinary condition. The billions produced in 1978 created an enormous population, but the combination of pristine surfaces, original color, superior strike, professional certification, and strong collector demand can reduce that population to a remarkably small group. That is why this familiar Lincoln cent remains worthy of a careful second look, not because every example is valuable, but because the right evidence can reveal a very different story hiding inside an otherwise ordinary piece of American pocket change. Last step, the 1990 U.S. Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, is a perfect example of how an apparently ordinary coin can become the subject of serious numismatic investigation when you know where to look. Hold one beneath a strong light and the first clues begin to appear. The tiny date, the mint mark or its absence, the texture of Lincoln's cheek, the sharpness of his hair, the quality of the lettering, the brightness of the original surfaces, and the subtle difference between a coin that merely looks shiny and one that still possesses genuine mint luster. Most 1990 cents are common, and that fact is important because it prevents us from turning an ordinary coin into something it is not. Yet collectors pay unusually close attention to this year because it contains several distinctly different collecting stories, including exceptionally high-grade circulation strikes, San Francisco proofs, and one particularly famous proof variety in which the expected mint mark is missing. As we examine the coin together, the goal is not simply to ask whether a 1990 cent is valuable, but to determine what evidence would justify a premium. Later, we will examine authenticated auction results and see how dramatically the market can separate an ordinary survivor from an exceptional specimen. The most important lesson will be that the date itself is only the beginning of the investigation. Condition, mint of origin, original surfaces, color, strike, certification, variety, and genuine mint-made abnormalities can transform the collector's significance of a coin that was originally produced by the billions. The physical coin gives us our first opportunity to separate fact from assumption. The regular 1990 Lincoln cent belongs to the later phase of the Memorial Cent series, but unlike the classic bronze cents of earlier decades, it was struck on a copper-plated zinc planchet. The standard specifications are approximately 19 millimeters in diameter, 2.5 grams in weight, and a plain, non-reeded edge. PCGS identifies the metal as copper-plated zinc and lists Victor David Brenner and Frank Gasparo as the designers of the obverse and reverse, respectively. The obverse retains Brenner's familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln facing right, with liberty along the left side, in God we trust above, and the date below. The reverse presents Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial, surrounded by United States of America, EPLURIBUS UNUM, and 1 cent. The tiny FG initials near the memorial identify Gasparo. The design was already deeply established by 1990, but its symbolism remained powerful. Lincoln's portrait connected the smallest American denomination to a president associated with national preservation and reunification, while the memorial reverse transformed a monument in Washington into an image carried millions of times through everyday American life. The copper-plated zinc composition also changed the way these cents behave compared with earlier bronze pieces. The thin copper layer gives the coin its familiar copper appearance, but damage that penetrates the plating can expose the zinc beneath, creating a very different surface appearance. For the collector examining a 1990 cent, that means the first question should be simple and physical. Does the coin have the correct diameter and weight? Is the edge normal? Does the surface appear original? Is the copper layer intact? These observations cannot establish rarity by themselves, but they can quickly identify coins that deserve closer inspection. Now the investigation moves to the mint marks, because 1990 offers a useful lesson in how production location can completely change the story. Philadelphia struck approximately 6,851,765,000 regular cents, while Denver produced approximately 4,922,894,533. San Francisco struck approximately 3,299,559 proof cents. The Philadelphia circulation issue normally carries no mint mark. The Denver issue carries a small d, and the proof cents from San Francisco normally carry an S. That tiny letter is therefore one of the first things an experienced collector examines. But there is an important warning. The absence of a mint mark does not automatically mean the coin is a rare error. On a normal Philadelphia circulation strike, no mint mark is exactly what we expect. The extraordinary exception belongs to the proof series, and understanding that distinction is essential. In 1990, the United States Mint accidentally released a small number of proof Lincoln cents from San Francisco with the S mint mark missing. These are the famous 1990 No S Lincoln cents. According to PCGS research, the error was discovered in July 1990, and the Mint confirmed that 145 examples were destroyed. Fewer than 200 examples are believed to have surfaced, making this an entirely different rarity category from the billions of ordinary Philadelphia cents. This is where an experienced collector slows down rather than becoming excited too quickly. A normal unmarked 1990 cent found in pocket change is not a No S proof merely because there is no letter under the date. The coin must first display proof characteristics: specially prepared surfaces, sharper detail, reflective fields, and the overall appearance of a coin manufactured for a proof set. The distinction between a circulation strike and a proof is critical, and it is one of the clearest examples of why identification must come before valuation. The economic environment of 1990 provides another piece of the puzzle. America was entering a recessionary period, with economic activity weakening toward the end of the year, while the nation was also experiencing the uncertainty surrounding the Persian Gulf crisis after Iraq invaded Kuwait in August. Oil prices and consumer concerns were affected by the geopolitical instability, and the early 1990s would bring a noticeably different economic atmosphere from the booming years that followed later in the decade. Yet the cent remained an indispensable circulating denomination. Billions were manufactured because commerce still depended heavily on cash, and the 1-cent coin continued to serve as the final unit in everyday prices and transactions. By this time, however, the copper-plated zinc composition had become the standard for Lincoln cents following the 1982 transition away from the old bronze planchet. That production change matters when studying a 1990 coin because collectors sometimes assume that a copper-colored appearance means the coin contains mostly copper. It does not. The copper is primarily a thin outer layer over a zinc core. Manufacturing involved preparing the zinc-based planchets with copper plating and then striking them between dies under tremendous pressure, transferring Lincoln and the memorial design into the metal. The finished coins then entered a massive distribution network through banks and businesses. Many were immediately subjected to the ordinary violence of circulation: contact with other coins, scratches from cash drawers, friction inside coin-counting machines, environmental exposure, and repeated handling. Those marks become especially important when examining a supposed high-grade example. A 1990 cent may have survived without obvious where yet still be unsuitable for an elite mint state grade because of contact marks created before it ever reached the public. This is why collectors study the fields around Lincoln's portrait, the open areas behind his head, the cheek and jaw, the memorial's columns, and the reverse fields. The less disturbed those surfaces remain, the stronger the coin's condition story becomes. Once we establish that most 1990 cents are common, the real mystery becomes condition rarity. PCGS notes that 1990 Philadelphia cents are generally well struck and abundant through about MS-67, while MS-68 and higher become scarce. The Denver issue follows a similar pattern, with PCGS describing it as very common through roughly MS-67 and much harder to locate in MS-68 or better. This is where the terms BN, RB, and RD become important. BN means brown, indicating that the coin has largely lost the original red appearance of its copper surface. RB means red-brown, and RD means red, a designation reserved for coins retaining the required degree of original reddish coloration. With a modern copper-plated zinc cent, collectors still care deeply about originality and color, but they must also inspect the plating itself. A bright coin is not automatically a red coin, and a coin that has been chemically treated or polished should not be mistaken for a naturally brilliant mint state specimen. Original mint luster should have a coherent, flowing appearance as the coin moves under light, while an altered surface can look unnaturally uniform or harsh. At the highest grades, tiny disturbances become decisive. PCGS records a 1990D MS-68 red example selling for $75 in a 2018 David Lawrence auction, showing that even a very high grade does not automatically produce a four-figure result. But the extreme top of the population tells another story. A certified 1990D MS-69 red example has a recorded auction result of $2,938 from May 2021. For Philadelphia, the difference becomes even more dramatic. PCGS records an MS-69 red example realizing $7,200 at Heritage Auctions in June 2018. Those results should never be used as a blanket valuation for the date. They demonstrate condition rarity at an extraordinary level, where collectors are competing for coins that survived with almost impossibly clean surfaces and strong original color. A more realistic four-figure range, perhaps around $1,200 to $3,600, would only make sense for an unusually strong authenticated example whose grade, color, preservation, and market demand genuinely support it. The proof side of 1990 takes the investigation into even more fascinating territory. A normal 1990 S proof carries the S mint mark and was struck specifically for collectors, with specially prepared dies and planchets designed to create polished fields and sharper design details. PCGS records the proof mintage at 3,299,559 and identifies the coin as copper-plated zinc with the same 19mm diameter, 2.5-gram weight, and plain edge as the circulation cent. Proof collectors pay close attention to cameo and deep cameo contrast, the cleanliness of the mirrored fields, the frosting on Lincoln and the memorial, and the absence of spots, hairlines, haze, or disturbances. A certified 1990 SPR-70 example has a documented auction record of $2,358 from Heritage Auctions in January 2004. That is a legitimate benchmark for a specific certified proof, not a statement that every 1990 S proof approaches that level. Now look closely at the no S proof, because this is where 1990 becomes genuinely famous. The missing S was not created by somebody scraping away a mint mark after production. It originated because the proof dies were prepared without the expected mint mark. PCGS documents the 1990 NOS as a rare proof issue and identifies the FS101 die variety among its recognized varieties. The importance of this variety comes from the combination of proof status, minting error, and very limited surviving population. PCGS records an authenticated PR69 Deep Cameo NoS proof, selling for $5,175 in 2022, while its broader auction record includes substantially higher historical results. An extraordinary result such as that belongs exclusively to the rare NoS proof and must never be interpreted as the value of a normal unmarked 1990 Philadelphia cent. In fact, the very existence of this variety gives collectors a powerful lesson. Sometimes the most important detail on a coin is not what you see, but what should have been there and isn't. That same principle applies when searching for die varieties and mint errors on ordinary 1990 cents. The collector should examine the date for unusual doubling, inspect Liberty and In God WE Trust for genuine hub-related separation, check the reverse lettering and memorial details, and study the mint mark on Denver or proof pieces for evidence of alteration. But unusual-looking doubling is not automatically valuable. Mechanical or machine doubling can create flattened secondary edges that resemble a doubled die, while circulation damage can distort letters and numbers long after the coin left the mint. A genuine error should be supported by identifiable characteristics, and when the financial stakes are high, independent professional attribution. Other legitimate mint errors can include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, and struck-through pieces, but a coin should never be labeled as one of these simply because it looks unusual in a photograph. Authentication also requires attention to weight, diameter, edge, plating, and surface texture. A counterfeit or altered coin can sometimes be identified when the weight is inconsistent, the lettering looks unnatural, the plating has been disturbed, or a mint mark appears suspiciously modified. The NoS proof deserves particular caution because its value is high enough that authentication is essential. PCGS notes that fewer than 200 examples have surfaced, and that the variety is encountered only occasionally despite extensive searching of 1990 proof and prestige sets. That scarcity explains why collectors compete aggressively when a properly certified example appears. A coin that seems to have simply lost an S is not enough. It must have the correct proof characteristics and documented variety diagnostics. This is also why cleaning should be avoided. Never polish a potentially valuable cent to make the surfaces brighter, never scrape a suspected mint mark, and never use chemicals to reveal a supposed error. Any intervention can destroy the very evidence needed to authenticate the coin. The final assessment of a 1990 Lincoln Memorial cent comes down to disciplined observation rather than excitement. Start with the date. Then determine whether the coin is a Philadelphia circulation strike, Denver circulation strike, San Francisco proof, or a possible NoS proof. Next, examine the weight and diameter, then study the strike, luster, surfaces, color, lettering, design details, and overall eye appeal. On an ordinary circulated example, expectations should remain modest because the enormous mintages, about 6.85 billion from Philadelphia and 4.92 billion from Denver, make simple age insufficient to create rarity. On a superb red mint state example, however, the equation changes because condition rarity can sharply reduce the number of genuinely competitive coins. A coin in the approximate $1,000 to $4,000 range would need compelling evidence, professional authentication, an unusually high grade, exceptional original color, minimal surface disturbance, and enough collector demand to support that level. The NoS proof occupies an entirely separate category, with documented auction results demonstrating that exceptional authenticated examples can move well beyond the ordinary range. The $5,175 PR69 DCAM result in 2022 and the $8,813 result for the recognized FS1, a one variety, illustrate how extraordinary the market can become for this specific rarity. Preservation is equally important for the future. Handle the coin by its edges. Keep it in an inert holder or professionally certified holder. Protect it from humidity and chemicals, and never clean it. The 1990 cent is historically interesting not because it was a scarce coin when produced, but because it documents the mature Lincoln memorial design during the copper-plated zinc era and contains a remarkable numismatic accident within its proof production. Most examples are ordinary, and that is precisely why careful examination matters. The real collector's skill is recognizing the difference between a common coin that merely looks unusual and a rare coin whose physical evidence, production history, certification, and market record all point in the same direction. In the case of 1990, that investigation can lead from billions of everyday cents to a tiny population of condition rarities, and, in the extraordinary Noes proof, to one of the most fascinating modern Lincoln cent varieties ever released by accident.